before we start, who here is a fan of React? Okay, we have a few. Angular? Okay, Vue.js, any framework, like dying fans for frameworks? Okay, this talk is not about that, right? In fact, if you are truly passionate about frameworks and tools, this talk is actually for you, and it will try to steer you maybe towards something else. Unfortunately, this talk is not necessarily a positive one, or I wouldn't necessarily call it like, anyway, it's not necessarily a good story. It's not necessarily a nice story. It's a real story. It's a story of the web platform. It's a story of web development and of what are the struggles that we as web developers have, what we should focus on, what are our priorities, and so on and so forth. Now that I set the stage for this very grim next 45 minutes, allow me to introduce myself. My name is Alex. I have other t-shirts than this one. It's not, I don't have the same one everywhere I go, just for the reference. I'm from here, from Cluj. I'm not sure how many people are from here. One final note before I move this slide. If you want to follow the slides, if you want to later catch the slides, there are some links along the way which you might be interested in. You can find them on bit.ly/modern-struggle. They're already there, so this is an online deck. You can just go there and find the slides and go through them later. I work as an open source engineer at a startup from Cluj called Teleport. Did anyone hear about us? Okay, everyone saw this. So people who heard about Teleport probably saw this video. I'm a rather new hire there, so don't ask me about this specific thing because I was not part of the team when they did the image processing AI part. But I do work on code generation, which is really exciting. So if you have questions about how we think this will move further, do ask me after this. I'm really curious to talk about it. I'm also one of the organizers of JS Heroes. Who here heard of JS Heroes? Okay. JS Heroes is the local community from Cluj. Started as a local community from Cluj, but it evolved into an international JavaScript community. We have members in other countries around the world, and we organize JS Heroes. The conference, which is a yearly event, we do it in April next year, here in Cluj. 700 attendees and world-renowned speakers from all over the world into what we think is one of the biggest JavaScript conferences in this part of Europe, let's say. If you are interested also in JS Heroes, in getting tickets for the conference, we are partnering up here with Vox Days, so I have discount links for people who are interested in that. And early birds are ending on December 1st, so if you want to catch that early bird, you should hurry up. Okay, enough shameless advertising. Let's move to the actual topic for today. So, web development. Let's talk a bit about the web platform. The web, as we know it, is a rather, let's say, almost mature adult, right? It's like a teenager going towards adulthood. It has like 20-something years old. And it started as a simple way of passing data from one data center to another between deeply skilled scientists. We ended up using the web as a way to search information, a way to shop, to buy stuff online. And we started doing business on the web, right? So the web today is definitely not the same web that used to be 20 years ago. And through all these developments, we started building experiences, right? Something that wasn't necessarily on the focus of early adopters of web, right? Like creating user experiences. The problem is that with these user experiences and with the fact that we work in a field that is rather new compared to other, let's say, engineering branches, even with other software engineering branches like I don't know, C or mainframe or whatever we had, like that are more than 20 years old, because we are in a quite, let's say, unstable community, we tended to be very erratic about like what do we learn, how do we focus our priorities. You know, we started building communities for passionate people that are passionate about React, people that are passionate about tools, about developments of the web. People started bashing each other, like my framework is better than yours, my website is better than yours, and so on and so forth. So this is actually, this somehow took us, as web developers, took us from the real problem, from the real connection that we had with the users, to a place where we kind of like lost focus. Like why are we building apps? Who are we building apps for today, right? We don't necessarily have that as our main focus when we start building stuff. We're like, oh yeah, I need to learn this. I would definitely want to use that framework or that library because I want to use it, not because my users will benefit from it. So this problem of focus and priority actually leads me to, I mean, yeah, no, let's step back a bit. I want to go a bit different here. Like, consider yourself a user, right? This is one thing that I would like you to remember from this. Whenever you start building something, you have to do like a click in your head, like I'm not a developer anymore, I'm the user now. If you can do that, then you can look at the website and say, okay, what do you care about when you look at this website? Do you care whether it's built with React or Angular? Do you care whether they are using continuous integration? Do you care what code coverage they have in their tests? Right? You don't care about that. You might care of the fact that the data, when you log in, the data is secure. You might care about the fact that when you want to look for something and you're maybe commuting to work, or you're in a place with low Wi-Fi connection, or maybe no Wi-Fi connection, just 3G or 2G, you might want to, you might be interested in the fact that the website actually loads fast on your device. But then, of course, people said, okay, come on, Alex, like a lot of users of Amazon have no idea what React and Angular is. Of course, they don't care about that. Okay, then let's take this example, right? You know this website, CSS Tricks? This is for us as developers. But when we go to CSS Tricks, we are no longer developers, we are users. So again, as a user of CSS Tricks, I honestly don't care if they have continuous integration. I don't care whether the site is built with React or Angular. I care about the content, because that's why I'm going to CSS Tricks. I care about the fact that in case I'm not able to use the mouse for whatever reason, maybe I have a broken arm, I can actually navigate the site using the keyboard. I care about, again, performance. Maybe they have offline support, because I might want to read some articles while I'm on a plane, 8-hour plane to New York. So again, this is very important. This is why I wanted to give you these examples, because the main idea behind the talk is that you have to step out of your like cocoon of developer experience and step into the user experience part. Because when we talk about software quality, this is kind of like the resulting thing from here, right? So we talked about the context, now like let's talk about software quality. This is a question that I ask a lot of people, like, how do you define software quality? And they're like, well, you know, good test coverage and, I don't know, a clean architecture, low coupling between modules and so on. Honestly, I'm sure many of you thought of this when you heard about software quality. I'm sure if you ask people, you will get those answers. I even tried that 2 weeks ago while I was doing the slides with some people, and they gave me the exactly these answers, like, oh, a clean architecture, you're using immutable data structures, and so on and so forth. Our vision of software quality is broken because of that, because we think of software quality as a developer thing, right? We think that software quality should be reflected in what developers are thinking about what we do, right? So we actually define software quality of what other developers might like about what we are doing. You say, oh, we have this perfect, this very nice project. You know, we use GraphQL and we use state-of-the-art technology and latest JavaScript. Developers will love it. But ask yourself, will the user love what you build there? Are you building for the user's needs, or are you building for the developer needs? Okay, so we have two sides here, right? We talked about user needs, user experience, developer experience. These two sides are, I want to like showcase them with my favorite characters, whom, if you saw some of my previous talks, are, let's say, recurring characters, Alice and Bob. In this case, Alice represents the developers that have a focus on user experience, that understand that user experience comes first and that their priorities should be based upon solving the user needs first and then the developer needs. And Bob thinks that software quality is about code coverage and about CI/CD and all these other practices of software engineering, sorry. Why I'm doing this talk and why I'm advocating for the things that you will see coming in the next slides is that this is a problem. The vast majority of the development community today, the vast majority of professionals that work in this field, whether it's people that are working in this field in Cluj or in Bucharest or in any other country in the world, we tend to go on Bob's side. Right? We tend to be very passionate about frameworks, about libraries. We tend to focus a lot on making our lives easier. I can give you an example. Like everyone is happy when you don't need to support IE 11, right? Yay! But users are using that. Like you are basically saying to the users, please upgrade to Chrome. That used to be a very funny thing, right? Like when you see in the browsers, please use a browser like that, please use that. That's not okay, if you ask me. Chrome even did that, and they got a little bashing for that. Like on some of the, Google actually did that, sorry. On some of their websites, they are saying that this website only works on Chrome. That's not okay. Because then, as a developer, you are taking your problem of making the browser of making the app cross-browser compliant, you're taking that problem and you're putting it to the user. Say, okay, deal with it. You know what? I'm not going to support IE 11. You deal with this problem. You upgrade your browser, whatever. So we are here, right? The vast majority of developers are here. They care about dev experience. They care about frameworks, about libraries, about what's the latest flavor of JavaScript, whether they use TypeScript or Flow or whatever. My idea or my desire is to bring people on Alice's side. Right, to bring people to the side where we put user needs first. But before we go to that step, I know this talk sounds like an introduction to an introduction to an introduction, but I'm going to get there, don't worry. Before we get there, let's talk about dev experience, what dev experience actually is. Well, in a simple explanation, let's say dev experience is about all the things, all these nice logos that we care about, right? All these choices that we make in a project, whether we use a framework or another, whether we use a library or another, whether we whether you use Atom or VS Code or whatever other decision developers are really faced with today. Tough decisions, all of them. They bring no output. That's the problem. They bring no output. Or let's not deal in absolute, but they bring very little output to the user. So for me, dev experience is like this, right? It's like, you know the scene from Matrix where they say they need guns, right? This is what we have today. Like, we need tools to build web apps. Okay, there we are. Tens of frameworks, standards, libraries. We have them all. What do we do with them? The problem is that we stop here. We just are very curious, very passionate about learning how to use each individual tool, how to use each individual library. And we hide behind false metrics. That's That's the harsh reality of it. We hide behind metrics like code coverage. Like my project has 98% code coverage, 100% code coverage. I test my constants that they are still constants when they leave the system. Clean code and architecture, right? We hide behind this idea that, oh, we're going to work another 3 sprints on ensuring that each function has a code complexity of less than 3 cyclomatic, has less than 3 cyclomatic complexity. Yeah, code complexity being one of them. Cohesion and coupling and having a CI/CD pipeline that does tens of thousands of steps and automated tests and so on. Don't get me wrong. Now, I truly love working on these. I'm not saying that we shouldn't have these. I'm saying that our priorities are not right here. These should not be the first thing that we focus on when we start a project or when we work on a project or when we want to deliver something to the user. I like this quote from Ralph Johnson, who's one of the writers of Design Patterns, the classic Gang of Four book, like probably everyone heard of it, or every teacher in university tried to shove it down our throats. We have to learn it. But it's a good book. It really is a good book. It taught us a lot about how to deal with modern software architecture. And I especially like that someone who wrote the book also considered this, right? Although they were really experienced, they had a lot of experience, they knew how to phrase everything, how to put things into perspective and how to present those architectures and solutions. I really like this thing. Like, before software can be reusable, it has to be usable. And how many times did you come up with this idea while you started the project and you started building some stuff? Maybe you started building some component for the front end, and the second you type something, you say, oh, maybe we can reuse this later. Let's abstract it away in something else. And you start to lose focus on this. You start building abstractions and blah, 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 but you don't have yet a product. No one is using what you have. So it's always premature optimization. Before reusing, I think you have, before asking yourself this, right? How would I be reusing this code later? Maybe you can ask yourself, who is using it? Who is using what I'm building? So let's talk about that. Let's talk about user experience. And the problem here again is that we got it again wrong. The term user experience itself, the way when I tell you user experience, you're probably thinking of some non-technical person sitting behind the board, maybe even a designer, saying, this button should be 3 pixels to the left, this color is not matching the particular color that attracts people to buy stuff online, or this shade of red is maybe a bit too, and so on. User experience is not about that. User experience has itself a problem. So we already talked about the division between people that focus on user experience and people that focus on dev experience. And now, even if just a handful of people actually focus on user experience, they again focus on the wrong thing. Because we have two sides to user experience. The user needs, on the left here, right? The basic needs of the user, like basic food, right? That you need to eat to survive. And the user delight, right? The thing that you don't necessarily need, but it's nice, right? So I'm pretty sure a lot of you can relate to this when I say that when we think of user experience, when people are throwing around that word UX, 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 they are thinking about the delight, right? They are thinking about the nice little things that can make this experience smoother for our user, that flows that will make them to buy stuff with one click, or to have the utmost wonderful experience on going through the next and the next and the next Netflix movie without sticking their heads out of the laptop or TV or whatever. So, user needs versus user delights. But what are the user needs? Okay, what does the user need from us, right, as developers? I try to make a parallel to the pyramid of human needs, right, developed by Maslow. You know that, right? You know the pyramid of needs, right? Basic needs, and moving further up the ladder of needs. And I identified 4 different areas that we are going to talk about. First and foremost, the user needs from us as developers to build something that they can access, right? So availability and accessibility is the fundamental thing. If they cannot access whatever you are building, then it's wrong. You cannot go another level. This is the blocker, right? If I cannot use your service, I don't care whether it's colorful, fast, delightful, whatever, I cannot use it. And I have a good example of this. I was creating, I created some templates in a platform, you know, it's Typeform, where you can actually build your custom forms and you send them to people to get stuff out of that. So I edited these forms on my laptop, and then I went away for a week without my laptop. I had only my phone, and I wanted to log in to see how many people responded to my form. And guess what? Typeform says, we are sorry, but you cannot access the admin dashboard on a mobile device. Tough luck. They failed the availability and accessibility rule. Then we need safety and privacy, right? This is maybe also one of the core ideas that's been thrown around in the recent years, and we've seen a huge amount of disturbance in like the huge companies of what they understand by privacy and safety and how they treat safety and privacy and so on. So this is also fundamental for the user. On top of that, we have convenience and cost. How fast does the app load? And what does it cost, right? Has anyone ever asked, like, you know, on a 3G connection, what's the cost of my website? Where you can actually find out, there's a website for that, what does my website cost? Where you can send your website if it's a public link, and they will tell you, according to each country in the world, and based on their purchase parity, how much does it cost, considering how much a megabyte of data costs. And you would be amazed to see that in some countries, accessing a very simple website costs 10 cents. And then you can ask yourself, like, okay, I'm building this website, would I pay 10 cents to visit it every time? I don't know, maybe, maybe not. It's a good question, I guess. And then we get to the top. And there to the top, we have delightful experience. Because this is the part where this is what people think user experience is about, right? The delightful part of making of creating an experience for the user. But in order to create an experience for the user, you need to have all the fundamentals first. Sadly, like I said, focus is the other way around. So you can actually see it like this, right? And I'm pretty sure that humans did not yet invent structures that hold like this, like stay in one single tip, and then they have a huge basis on top of that. So our process is, okay, let's take a designer or UI or UX designer, let's pay him a shit ton of money to create this awesome experience for the users. Let's spend a bit of time on optimizing some of our images because we want the user to get content fast and so on. Maybe we have some time to also make the connection over HTTPS or make secure cookies and so on. And maybe if we have some time, we might offer some support for screen readers. We might do that. Okay, I want to have it this way. And I think that those who embrace this approach, those web developers who understand that priorities are user needs, and these are the user needs, are what I like to call Engineer 2.0. It's a very flimsy name if you want, but anyway, I might find a better name for this later. Engineer 2.0 is the engineer who understands that user needs come first. The engineer that has their priorities straightened up, and that the engineer that understands that even though project management or product management or whoever else role says we don't have time for that, they understand that it's not about time, it's about what we have to do. It's our duty to provide quality services. I'm going to make a parallel here, which maybe is not necessarily, not entirely right, but it's not entirely wrong either. All engineering branches have this duty that you have towards your users, right? When you're building a bridge, you cannot say, well, the project manager said we don't have time to mount those cables, so we just created a structure. And we hope it doesn't harm anyone, right? That's the thing, right? You as an engineer have a duty that you have to respect, right? It's, if someone asks you to build something in 10 days, you have to say, we cannot build that in 10 days because we don't have time to make it fully accessible and secure and fast. So for Engineer 2.0, we now have a definition of software quality. Software quality is the sum of accessibility, security, and performance, the pillars of software quality. So if someone asks you, how do you define software quality, now you have an easy answer. You don't have to think of metrics. You don't have to think of stuff from the developer realm or from the user realm. It's just this. It's fulfilling the user needs. So we're going to take the three of them. Now, each one of them deserves a talk on its own, and it's maybe even a full day of talks on their own. But I'm going to go through all of them, and I'm going to quickly show you some data to understand that the problem is real. I'm going to show you the, maybe come up with some standards, maybe just some hints of practices that you might look into. But all of these require you actually to go in depth into them and to understand what the problems are, how to solve them, how to prevent them, and so on and so forth. So first and foremost, accessibility, because it was the basis of our pyramid. Accessibility is about inclusive design and development. And the mantra of accessibility is exactly the thing I said at the beginning. You are not the user. You have to snap out of this box, right? And you say, okay, I'm not the user. Let's see who the user is. And you must, in order to have fully accessible services on the web, you must remember that users are also people with permanent disabilities, people with episodic or temporary disabilities. Like I said, broken arm, I cannot use the mouse. Do you have support for that on your website to use the keyboard? I don't know, you might not have. Aging people, which we don't consider usually our user group, right? But that's today, right? What happens in 20 years from now? What happens 30 years from now? We're going to have a huge amount of aging people that are still going to be users of the web. They will buy stuff online. They will have the user experience online. People in developing countries that have a problem accessing services, that have certain, I don't know, any cultural aspect that you might consider here or not. Of course, it always depends on who you are building for. You have to understand that, but we'll get to that in a bit. A few data points here, which maybe would be eye-opener for some people. 1.3 billion people in the world have some form of vision impairment. So they need glasses, or they need, they might have, and actually no, that's all the people that need glasses or have moderate or severe impairment, but a huge number of that, actually even with that, it doesn't help them. And 36 million people are blind. So that's 36 million potential users for worldwide services. There's a source here. Again, if you have the slides later, you can read the articles where this data was captured. What's more important, especially regarding accessibility, is that most of these disabilities are in developing countries. So in countries where you actually get more chances of having users from these categories. 8% of all the men have some form of red-green color blindness, so it's not just a cliche that we don't distinguish colors properly. But in all seriousness, color blindness is one of the biggest problems in accessibility because you have problems with different contrasts. So you cannot differentiate foreground text from background color. Only 0.5% of women have that, but I shouldn't say only 0.5% because if you consider the entire population, that's a huge number. And this one made in the United States, which is really, really troublesome, like 35% of all adults aged 40 and older have experienced some sort of vestibular dysfunction. So this means that they might have motion sickness in case of flashing content, in case of fast-moving content. So this means that shitty parallax effect that everyone does in websites where they scroll the website and the background goes the other way around, that makes people sick. Yeah. These are the sources for the articles. Luckily, we have this. We have the Web Accessibility, the WCAG, right? Web Accessibility Guidelines. It's a very comprehensive document of all the guidelines that one can follow to make sure that the websites are fully compliant. I'm not going to go here into whether the EU has some laws for accessibility or the United States and so on, because I'm not a lawyer and I don't think we should consider this as whether it's the law or not. We should consider this whether it's ethic or not, which is a different thing. But anyway, this is it's a very comprehensive document. A few practices that I extracted from here that I think you could follow first in case you're doing this for the first time. You have to understand demographics. You have to understand whether users are coming from a certain country or not, from a certain culture. How are they accessing the website? When are they accessing the website, and so on. HTML semantics are the fundamental rule, if you want, of accessibility, right? A button should be a button, should not be a span with an on-click action. A P should be a P, a heading should be a heading. Header, footer, article aside, use them because they're not just, they're not for developers to read. They're also for screen readers to read. And screen readers understand a lot more of a website when reading semantic HTML than when reading the div fest that most of us have in our websites. Test using screen readers. If you have a MacBook, you can actually do Command F5, I think, and you have VoiceOver that actually reads the content as a screen reader would. It's imperative to test using screen readers because you will find out problems that you had no idea that you have on the website. You can test for color contrasts. Chrome has a extension for that, not extension. It has it's built into Chrome. When you look at the element of a text, you have there a color contrast thing when you set the color on something, so it will test the color against the background color. So it will give you some scores. You can read more about that as you go there. And there's also ARIA, like those ARIA labels that maybe a lot of us heard about. Those should be the last resort. Those are the hacks of accessibility. So in case you cannot make it semantically valid, you use ARIA to tell the screen readers that, hey, this is actually a button. But there's no reason, if you're just building a regular website, there are very few reasons not to actually use buttons when buttons are needed and so on. Some tooling for accessibility. Xcore is a great library for doing end-to-end tests. They will give you a lot of hints of where you have problems in your interface. Lighthouse, which is the Chrome now plugin built directly into DevTools under the Audit tab. It will give you a lot of insights into accessibility as well. JAWS is a screen reader that is widely used across the world by people which have visual impairment, so you can test and see exactly how they see your website, right? Static analysis is can be also very useful. For example, ESLint has a plugin for React. If you're using that, JSX accessibility, which will give you things like, okay, this is a span, you shouldn't put an on-click on it. And also Funkify, which is this is a Chrome extension, which allows you to simulate various disabilities like color blindness, like motion sickness, or people with slow reflexes where the mouse will have some sort of lag. So you can actually get a feel of how users are actually interacting with your services. Okay, we move on to security. Hope we have time to get to all of them. Security is about ensuring privacy and safety. The mantra of security is assume the worst. And we've all seen a lot of cases in security world where the worst was not assumed by people working on the websites. The devil is in the details. I like this thing about security, and you have to ask yourself the question, like, am I doing the common sense things? Am I putting passwords where I should be putting passwords? Am I storing them properly? Am I using some framework or some tool that does automatic encoding of HTML to avoid script injection, and all sorts of questions. And who would be tempted to attack me, right? A few details or a few data points on security. This was a study done recently where they analyzed close to 500,000 websites. 77% of them use libraries that have some sort of known vulnerability. A lot of this is due to Bootstrap and jQuery, which are not upgraded in time. There are always patches. Whenever a security problem is found, even in very early versions of libraries, they have security patches for that, but people don't know about that, so they don't upgrade the websites. System misconfiguration causes 1 in 5 data breaches. So this is pretty much not putting passwords on servers or putting password as a server or doing really stupid things, right? System misconfiguration is actually one of the biggest problems so it's not a clever hacker that hacked his way through 10 layers of firewall. It's actually you not putting a password when you should have. And this is something that I found, and this is the source here. I would be curious if it's actually right. I didn't have time to dig deeper. And I'm not sure how it was computed, actually. So cross-site scripting represents 18% of all the reported bugs on the web. I'm not sure how they came up with the number, but it did cite a lot of websites where they started analyzing GitHub issues on open source software, or a lot of these bug trackers / reporters tools that have public metrics. Security has the OWASP Foundation, the Open Web Application Security Project. They define vulnerabilities, they group vulnerabilities together, they have a yearly top 10 security vulnerabilities for the web, and they are doing an awesome job of providing fixes for all those vulnerabilities, or they promote practices to avoid being vulnerable in some cases. A few practices are, again, treat it seriously. Don't assume that, yeah, okay, we're just going to not put a password here, and we're going to remember when we go live. Update the libraries. If you have older libraries, try to stay up to date with libraries. You don't have to update major versions, so you still have backwards compatibility. You have to maintain a separate test suite for end-to-end tests that you know that you always can run, like a battery of tests after each deploy. Okay, I'm running these tests to make sure that the site is not susceptible to SQL injection or cross-site scripting or whatever. Don't write your own regexes. I'm not sure if you're familiar, but if you do write bad regexes, you give the opportunity to someone to introduce what is called a catastrophic backtracking in the regex computation. This means that if you're running Node, for example, which is running on a single process, you're giving someone the opportunity to do denial of service by simply putting something in the input that does that catastrophic backtracking for the regex. And don't reinvent the wheel, right? Don't write your own libraries that do validation for HTML, because this was done a ton of times before. And you might miss a lot of cases. That's the point. Quickly tooling. Sneak is a tool that allows you to see vulnerabilities in packages that you have in package.json. NPM audit, which comes now with NPM starting version 6 or 5 point something. You actually started seeing, maybe as you npm install on the latest version, you started seeing some warnings there for potential vulnerabilities. It's the same thing. They also have an audit fix, which automatically upgrades the patched versions for your packages. Helmet, if you're using Express, is a great package for hardening Express, for hiding implementation details to attackers, for doing for protecting against cross-site scripting, against all sorts of other threats. There's this tool called Z-Attack Proxy, which you can use to simulate all sorts of attacks on a website. And for regexes, there's regex 101, which actually also explains you how catastrophic backtracking can happen. So you can test your regexes if you do want to write them, but I don't know who wants to write them actually. Okay, the final one, performance. So performance is about loading times and about interactivity. And if you want to get deeper into performance, you have to understand the context. Where are the users? How are the users interacting with the website? And the process, right? You have to understand how the browsers work. And there's a lot of technical parts here, especially in the performance part. Where do the users come from, right? What kind of networks do they have? Do they come from mobile devices, on 3G networks? Do they come on desktop devices? Do they come from older browsers that have I don't know, maybe run JavaScript slower? What are the devices they are using? There's one thing to load a website on an iPhone and another thing to load it on an old Samsung Galaxy phone, which is quite popular in a lot of countries in the world. So there are all these questions that you can ask for performance. But the bottom line is that you have to understand a lot of the technical aspects in order to do performance optimization. A few data points also. The huge discrepancy between desktop and mobile, right? On mobile device, the average time is 15 seconds. Do you wait usually 15 seconds for websites to load? How many times have you tried to open a website and just close the tab because it was just spinning, right? We are shipping over 1 megabyte of data over the wire. So this means that if you look up the cost of 1 megabyte in a lot of countries, you understand just roughly, in average, what does a website cost for those people. And an interesting data point, Pinterest released recently. There are a lot of these like business cases on WPOstats.org. And I like this one specifically because it yielded huge numbers, like 40% decrease in wait time. So they just went through a sprint of performance optimization. And they yielded huge improvements in their entire platform. And it matters a lot because they have a lot of users. The sources are there also at the bottom if you want to look them up. For performance, we don't have standards, but we have some proposals, like the one from Google, the Rails standard of measuring response times in different steps of the application lifecycle. And we have this site here, which is http://archive.org, where there's a huge database of all the traffic on the web, where you can actually find data like the average time spent by users, the average megabytes, average I don't know, lines of JavaScript executed, whatever you find interesting there. A few practices of performance, optimizing the critical rendering path, so making sure that the user sees relevant content as soon as possible. Optimizing images, which are a huge pain because images are usually essential for websites. Reduce the bundle size, ensure that you have 60 frames per second to ensure a smooth experience for the users. We're getting down to the top there. We're getting to the user experience part. And eliminate third parties. This is my favorite one. Third parties usually just screw up your entire performance cycle. So as much as you can, just eliminate them. Or just defer them, right? Google Analytics can load 10 seconds after the user sees the website. Tooling, again, Lighthouse, GTmetrix and Web Page Test are two platforms for testing websites. They give you huge lists of improvement possibilities. You can use Puppeteer to create end-to-end tests. This is a headless Chrome implementation that allows you to plug into the Chrome API so you can get information as Chrome DevTools gets information from the website, like when are the times of loading. You see the things you see in the network tab and so on. Speed curve and caliber are more enterprisey if you need that for monitoring and stuff like that. Okay, we are almost there. We're almost at the end. And it doesn't really seem very nice, right? It seems like a very hard road ahead because you have to learn a lot of new things. You have to, I don't know. There's a lot of there are a lot of unknowns here, and I must be honest. I'm by no means an expert at all of these. I'm mostly I worked on performance optimization, so I can talk a lot about that if you want. But I'm in no means an accessibility or security expert. Luckily, what the beauty I find in this is that you can actually be inspired by that. You can treat it that not as something like, oh shit, we have to do accessibility. Oh, we have to test with screen readers. We don't like that. You can actually be inspired to learn new things, to understand how the web works. And you have to think about the user. And thinking about the user will actually make your life easier at the end. And you're not alone. This is not something that you can do alone. So you work on performance and then the entire team screws up everything. No, no, no. This is something that's done at a team culture level. This is something that we tried doing at our previous, at the previous company where I worked on, in our team. So we had a team of like 20 JavaScript developers. And we started treating performance and security and accessibility really serious in our applications. But in order to actually make it a team culture thing, we started doing things like printing security cheat sheets or performance cheat sheets and just putting them on the walls in the open office so that every time people just look around or they need some time to think about the feature they're working on, they are constantly reminded that these are real things as well. These are things that you have to take into consideration as you're building the application. And we did celebrate. So once we got to the point where, hey, we just went through a sprint of performance optimization and now the website loads from 8 seconds to 4 seconds on slow connections, there was time to celebrate. So we went to product management and we said, okay, hey, let's try to celebrate this. Let's try to acknowledge the good work of people. So whenever metrics coming from the real usage of the application were coming back into into product management, they would immediately come to us and say, oh, hey, look, we have new results, we have better performance, we have better user experience, blah, 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 blah. And this process from going from like really looking at this with a very grim face, I have to do that, to actually making it a team effort, to making it a thing that we celebrated. And in the end, it turns out that we are getting excited about it. We are happy now that, yay, we get to work on performance, we get to squeeze that second out of the loading time, or we get to make the website faster or safer or accessible. That's a good story. And that's the story of Engineer 2.0. And if you'll just bear with me just one more minute, what I think is the major difference of Engineer 2.0 is that together with this relationship that we have with our peers, right, with the rest of the people that we work with, this is especially for web or for front-end engineers, which probably most of you are since you came to this talk. The front-end engineers have another special relationship. That's the one with the user. And you see, if you actually treasure this relationship, if you understand that it doesn't really matter that you don't know in person who the user is. It doesn't really matter that the user communicates to you through a product manager or a business analyst. You have that relationship because whatever you build ends up on the user screen. And when you cherish that relationship, you become what I like to call the empathic engineer. And I think this is what we should move towards, right? Empathic engineering, when we care about the user, when we care about who is on the other end of the wire. Thank you.